Hi everybody. Okay, welcome to the next webinar, which today is going to be all around podcasting. We're lucky to have James on with us, James Burtt, who's Mr. Podcasts. So we normally give it till about 3 or just past 3 minutes past before we make a start. Just as a bit of a reminder, Q&A button at the top of your team screen. If you click on that, you can add your questions as we're going through as kind of a bit of a pinboard of things, in case it's a question that you want to come back to, and then we'll do our best to answer all of those in the Q&A section. There is also the chat function, so you can go onto that and use the chat. Those who are watching this as a recording, which we've noticed quite a lot of people are registering, so you get access to the recording and then we send it out sort of the day after. If there is anything pressing watching this, you can come through to me or go directly to James with queries as well from that perspective. So it's 3 minutes past now. I'll make a start because we can just get the intro bit out of the way. Yeah, okay, so thank you, James, for agreeing to do this with me today. It's really good having you on. Oh, I've just realised you're still there. You go, you're unmuted now. So just I'll do a bit of an intro and then I'll ask you to intro yourself, if that's all right. So those who don't know me, but I've got a feeling pretty much everyone on here has been to one of the webinars before. I'm Katie Horn. I'm a fractional marketing director and work specifically in the recruitment sector. And that kind of involves helping businesses strategize and deliver their marketing effectively. I've been in the industry or worked in marketing for over 25 years, specializing in recruitment for about the last 9. We've won awards. We do lots of things with lots of different recruitment companies. So yeah, I'm one of them really sad people that really loves marketing, which I'm sure will come out today. I'll start using my arms and flapping them around. So I'm really excited about today and James being on here, because podcasting is something that everybody that I speak to, it seems to be the buzzword. So it's really great to have somebody that will kind of give us a bit of actual expert advice on it. And I've given James a huge list of questions, and most of them are things that I want to know. So I know that they're going to appeal also to the people listening to this today. Okay, so the podcast. Oh, look, I apologise, James, at how blurry your picture is there. But we can see the real you. So I'll stop sharing my screen and then we can see the real you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Katie, first and foremost, for having me on. Yeah, so as Katie's very generously called me, I'm the podcast king. Some people call me the podcast king. When I first got called that, I was like, oh, that's a horrible nickname. But it's actually quite a good little bit of branding, I suppose. Only if other people call you it, not if you call yourself it, because you just sound like an absolute idiot. But yeah, so I've been in and around the podcasting space since 2017. Prior to that, I worked with the likes of Nando's, Nintendo, Xbox, Thomas Cook. Not such a good brag these days. And I was basically involved in the world of PR, broadcast. I was a radio presenter. I've done stuff all around the marketing space, basically, before 2017. And then 2017, I've been listening to podcasts for 5 years. I love them. I just absolutely fell in love with the medium in 2012. And I was like, I've been sacked from the radio in 2010 by the former head of Radio 1 because he just hated me. Like a genuine deep hate, which I didn't think was necessary, frankly, but there you go. And I sort of thought to myself, after 5 years of sitting on the flipping fence, I should probably do a podcast because it's kind of like radio, but nobody can sack you. Like, that's a complete win-win. But I didn't have any experience. I didn't have any knowledge. I'd done some, as I say, some broadcast stuff. I'd been on national radio, but I didn't have any of the strategies or tactics. I read every blog that you could read, of which there weren't very many. I watched every YouTube video, of which there weren't very many. And I basically treated my own first ever podcast like the launch of a PR campaign, effectively. Anyway, day one, I go live and I sort of I wait to see what happens. And I check the charts at about lunchtime and I can't see it in the top 200. So I'm scrolling through. It's not in the top 100. I can't, so I'll keep going up and up and up. And lo and behold, number 1 was Tim Ferriss. Number 3 was Gary Vaynerchuk. And number 2 was James Burtt from Bromley, who'd recorded this thing on Skype on his dining room table. So inadvertently, I had the second biggest business podcast in the country. With zero knowledge on how to do it. And yeah, that's how I got started. Fast forward 6 years, we've launched 177 podcasts now for clients around the world, and we produce 20, 30 shows a week. We consult to TV companies, movies, celebrities, influencers, actors, athletes, and all that kind of good stuff. And more importantly for the audience that's here today, we also work with a lot of specialist companies like recruitment companies. We've done a lot of recruitment podcasts in the last 6 to 12 months, and they work really, really well as a lead gen tool. So happy to share whatever I can about it today.
Yeah, brilliant. I think you're right. I think like certainly in the recruitment sector, everybody, or the buzzword over the last, however many years, has been around niching, and the need to niche in to kind of grow in that sector, grow your industry kind of experience and reach within like a really specialist niche. And podcasting is a great way, obviously, to demonstrate that. If you're talking about a specialist subject, and especially if it's something that you're knowledgeable on, then people will be interested. And like you said, lots of people use it for lead gen, as getting people to come on their podcast is a good way to kind of open that communication. And I'm a massive fan of podcasts, but only recently, I have to admit. Like before, it was one of them things that I would listen to the odd few, and then they put it onto an app on my car, and then that pretty much changed everything now, because I'll drive everywhere and I listen to a podcast as I'm going. I now started listening to it in the gym in the mornings. I look like a complete mad woman. I was listening to the Rob Beckett one this morning, like laughing to myself, and everyone's like, what's that woman laughing at? But it is, once you get into it, I think it is definitely a really addictive thing, and it's a great way to kind of take in knowledge in a nice relaxed environment, and you can do it at your own pace and own time and things like that. But there are also a lot of bad podcasts that I've seen, or ones that are hyped very well, and then when you listen to them, it's not really what it's supposed to deliver, and or they are just people feeling like they should do a podcast. So like, I guess that kind of leads to my first question, is like, is podcasting right for everybody?
Great question, and the answer is no, it's not for everybody. And the perception is, everybody's got a podcast now. They really haven't. There's been 4 million podcasts that have ever been created, and that's basically, to have a podcast, you need what's called an RSS feed. And without getting too technical, that's basically the back end. So when you download a show from Apple CarPlay in your instance, or on the Apple app, or Spotify, or wherever it may be, you're not actually taking it directly from that platform. You're taking it from what's called an RSS feed, which requires you to set up like an email account and an RSS account. So there's been 4 million, or probably a bit more than that now, 4 and a bit million podcasts that have ever been created in the history of time. Now, you can look at that and go, well, 4 million, that's quite a lot. But when you compare that, actually, there's 100 million Facebook pages. There's now, I think, just under 1 billion accounts on LinkedIn. There's well over 1 billion accounts on YouTube, which is obviously linked to Gmail accounts and stuff. So when even if you looked at 4 million versus 100 million versus the best part of 1 billion, it's still a very, very sort of untapped market. But even more so than that, only 8% of podcasts actually produce content every 30 days. So this last month, for example, in the month of February, only 380,000 podcasts produced new content. So when you look at it in terms of how big the market opportunity is, there's not many things in marketing that are still blue ocean.
Yeah.
And this is still, I wouldn't say it's blue, it's probably like a murky purple. It's not quite blood red, it's not quite bright blue, it's probably somewhere in the middle at the moment. But there's definitely a space for you if you've got something to say, if you know who your market is. And this goes back to your original question, Katie, is it for everybody? No. But if you know who your target market is, if you know how to communicate with them, if you know how to deliver information, entertainment and education in a way that will elevate your brand positioning, then yes, it could be for you. And just to give some clarity to people who are sitting on the call now going, yeah, but I'm in a niche, we did a geological recruitment podcast based on deep piling. Now that's a niche. It went into the top 30 shows in the recruitment sector or career section. It was getting just under 1,000 downloads a month. And again, people look at that and I think they listen to like a Bartlett or a high performance podcast or Happy Place with Fern. They go, oh, it's only 1,000 people. It's 1,000 people who are listening about deep piling recruitment. Like, what would it mean if you had 1,000 people sat in front of you? You'd have to hire the Hammersmith Apollo. And when you start to think of it like that, it becomes a little bit different in how sort of serious you take it. So is it for everybody? No. But if you know who your target market is and you know effectively your core messages and your objectives and how you want to communicate with them than it could be for you.
Yeah, I like you are 100% right. And what you just said there about like education and making it fun and entertaining, and that it does make you think like what makes a good presenter, like what kind of key skills do people need to be able to kind of, if they said, right, I'm going to start a podcast, what are the kind of skills that people need to do that?
So the top one skill that they taught us sort of back at broadcast school, and at the time they used to labour on about it, and now I understand why, but talk in the singular. Like imagine that you're talking to one person. So what I always say, and this might sound a little bit grandiose, but before I work with any clients, I get really, really clear on, first and foremost, what does podcast success look like for them? What does this podcast need to do for it to be a success? Then we can reverse engineer the content, which we'll come on to probably later as to how you can make certain formats of content, especially for recruitment-based podcasts. But then I always, before you hit the big red button to record, before you go live on Zoom, before you go live on Teams or Riverside or whatever platform you're going to use, think what is in it for them. What is in it for that one person, that ideal target person that is going to listen to this content? And I make people, and again, this goes back to my old school PR background, I've got an avatar. So with a podcast, I've got an exact avatar, and I've given them a name. I know who they are. I know where they live. I know
Have you been watching my pod? Have you been listening to my webinars about avatars by any chance?
No, I haven't actually. But it's good. But it's proper old school marketing, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's premise and the basis of marketing. So, for example, and I'll give you an example. So I used to have a podcast before I'm involved in 2 or 3 that I now present, but I used to have one called Building the Brand. So I'd interview people, everyone from the inventor of the trunky suitcase to Grant Cardone, to footballers, athletes, whatever it may be. And I started to see that the download numbers were they sort of flatline, then they started dipping a little bit. And I was like, why is that? And then what I looked at was that my shows had gradually been getting a bit longer, and a bit longer, and a bit longer, and a bit longer. But I knew that my avatar, Jimmy, who lives in, who commutes from Kent up into Canary Wharf, I made this guy up, and it sounds a bit like, what the hell is this guy talking about? But I was like, I know Jimmy's 35 years old. He's got a steady job. He earns 80 grand a year, but he actually really hates his job. He's looking at buy-to-let properties, looking at crypto, looking at all this different stuff to have a residual income so he can spend more time at home with the family. He commutes for 25 minutes a day, and that was the point I hadn't realised. My show's getting longer and longer and longer. But my ideal listener, Jimmy, he's only commuting for 25 minutes. So if I'm talking for an hour and a half, then he has to use 3 of his commutes to listen to one of my podcasts. As soon as I started condensing it, the download numbers started going back up again. So get really, really clear on who your ideal avatar is. Speak as if you're speaking to one person. And the other thing that I'd say to people is podcasts, when they're done brilliantly, they are conversational, peer-to-peer conversations. What you don't need to be is Piers Morgan or Jeremy Paxman or Andrew Marr. You're not an investigative journalist unless you're doing that type of content. In general, it's a conversation, a peer-to-peer conversation. Be yourself, talk in the singular, and think about what's in it for that listening audience. That would be a good place to start.
Yeah. I know I joked, but like that avatar thing is something, and I'm sure people are bored of me going on about it, but I talk about it quite a lot in that, if you can understand who your customers are, whatever marketing you're delivering, that's going to be your golden ticket to really like making sure that you're hitting that sweet spot and kind of finding the people of interest. So okay, so we've gone right. We know who our customers are. We know kind of like what they're interested in. But is there any kind of tips that you have to finding that sweet spot? So, I might know what they are interested in from a perspective of like they are looking for a new job, for instance, or they're looking at crypto and things like that. But what is it? Or what tips could you give about finding something that will personally pique their interest as well, outside of like the usual kind of pains that you would associate with your customers?
Yeah, so what I always look for, and again, this is sort of a bit over the top, but when I'm looking at a brand or how you create branding for customers and clients, I always look at core values, USPs, mission statement, value proposition, ideal buyer, stakeholders, and who you are and what you do. Now, in that sort of mix is USPs. I'm always looking for every niche that you've got, and for every there's hundreds of recruitment podcasts, but there's not hundreds of recruitment podcasts that specialize in your thing. So I always look for what is that USP, what's that unique selling point. And quite a lot of the time, when I work with clients on their brand, they'll tell me SPs, they'll tell me their selling points. You know, we're cheap, we're expensive, we're really hands-on, we're really hands-off. Like that, they're just generic things. But what's the what's the unique part in that selling point? And then double down into that area. What can you uniquely offer that listening audience? And what's the payoff? A brand is your reputation. Your brand is your reputation, nothing more, nothing less. But also another way to look at a brand is the delivery on a promise that you've already made to somebody. So you, with this podcast, what are you promising? What is the premise of this content, and how do you deliver that thing? So find the USP, what form of value you're going to deliver to people, and then come hell or high water, make sure you deliver it.
Yeah. And then in terms of kind of format, is there like a kind of unwritten rule of like the best formats that work if you're thinking of putting something together?
There used to be. It was very, very formulaic. And again, a lot of people you've probably listened to high performance podcasts, Happy Place, Diary of a CEO. So if you have listened to those shows, you think, well, it's one or two people sat opposite sides of the table. Ideally, one person's crying, which I don't know how that became a thing in podcasting, but it is. But no, it depends on what you want. So, for example, solo episodes of podcasts are brilliant for if you want to be the expert authority in your space, the trusted advisor in your space. And doing solo episodes of a podcast is a great way to do it because not everybody's doing it, which we told about earlier with the listening numbers or the amount of podcasts there are. Because it is a bit more difficult. You can't just like flip a selfie camera and just go live like you can on LinkedIn or Facebook or Insta or whatever. And because it is a little bit more difficult, and because not everybody's actually doing it, there's already that perception that if you are talking about a subject, you must be an expert. So solo podcasts are brilliant for getting that expert authority piece across. Guest interviews are great because obviously it enables you to be seen in a different light. It enables you to share your expertise with somebody else. A lot of time, people often find it easier to do interview type podcasts because, you know, if I said to you now, Katie, right, do 60 minutes on your acumen as a fractional marketing director. Well, you could probably do it because you've done loads of these webinars. But you'd probably find it more difficult to do it than you would to have a conversation with me. And there's still a way of you getting your expertise out, being seen as the expert through this conversation. Plus, the benefit with guest episodes is that obviously not only could you put it out across your network, but you can make me a bunch of assets, clips, trailers, and all that stuff, and you can share it across my network as well. Or you could encourage me to share it across my network, therefore increasing the reach. But there's, you know, we've started doing sort of like round tables. So, you know, we might have 3 or 4 people having an individual discussion. We're about to record one next week for a very, very high-end medical brand. And they're going to have a neuroscientist. I'm literally going to be the dumbest person that this man has ever met. But they're going to have a neuroscientist, a neurotherapist, a scanning expert, and a patient. So it's going to be 4 people. And they're basically going to tell the journey of the patient's story through this podcast via the different people. Wow. So in answer to your question, it's pretty much anything goes now. You know, there's a great podcast where the lady, I can't remember the name of it, but she goes walking with the dog. She literally got a couple of clip mics on and she goes walking with interesting people wherever they would walk their dog. And it's really cool. You know, Gary Neville did it with the overlap. You know, he did it with, you know, he was with Sky. So they probably had like a whole camera crew behind him, but they were just going out for walks. So no, it can be, solo is great for authority. Guest experts are brilliant because it extends your reach. Peer-to-peer sort of roundtable conversations are brilliant because, again, then you've got 4 times the people who could potentially get the reach of this show out there, and it just helps you to get to more people. So yeah, those would be a couple of the really sort of popular formats.
Just on that roundtable, because I know that that's become a really popular thing within the recruitment sector to try and organise these roundtables and use it as a way of like lead gen, but also again it's bringing back that voice of authority thing. And I know that lots of people that I know and that I've worked with are using these and it's working really well, but I don't think I've ever seen it as a podcast before. So if you wanted to do it as that, do you think that would, like, do you see that being a feature episode of a normal podcast, or are there podcasts that are just on like that kind of roundtable basis?
Yes, you can do them as like specials or one-offs, but the other thing that you don't have to, the brilliant thing with podcasts, you don't have to be too fixated on the format. As long as you're still, I always say, like a podcast name, artwork, and effectively the brand, it's got to be like Ron said, it's got to do what it says on the tin. So, for example, if this medical podcast, they wanted to have, these roundtable conversation with these neuroscientist experts, and then the next one they wanted it to be a solo episode about a rant about, ayahuasca or whatever. Like that would be a bit of a discombobulation. I wouldn't feel like it's the same show, if that makes sense. But unlike formats like TV or radio, where it's very formulaic, you have to do the same thing again and again. You don't need to do that with podcasting. It could be a solo episode. It could then be you and one guest. It could then be the next week could be another solo episode. That it could be a peer-to-peer round table. So the challenge is, and this sounds really stupid, but the thing that holds up most podcasts going live is organising diaries. So the more people that you've got in the mix, the more difficult it becomes.
Yeah.
Putting 4 people together for a peer-to-peer roundtable conversation every single week, when you've got a team the size of Bartlett or High Performance or the Overlap, it's pretty easier to do because there's multiple people around it. But if you're, like most of us, an entrepreneurial business leader who's spinning many plates, you're running teams, you've got family life and all this kind of stuff going on as well, it just becomes a bit more time consuming. So you could do it as the entire format, but equally, I'm not adverse. I actually quite like mixing up the content formats because, again, it depends what the outcome is. What does podcast success look like? But I did it with my Building the Brand podcast. I did 80, 90, 100 episodes with interviewing guests, and then lockdown happened. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do here? Well, I'm going to talk to people about the journey of creating a podcast agency, and I'm just going to literally document it. Some weeks I did 5 episodes in a week, and I'll do 2 the week after. That I wouldn't advise doing again, but I was just sort of testing and measuring stuff. But there's no fixed format you have to stick to, as long as the show delivers the promise that it's set out to for the listener.
And I guess that leads very nicely onto my next question that I'd written down, was around like the frequency and the kind of sweet spot around that. Like, what is too much? What's too not enough? Like, where should we be trying to set the bar with that?
Right, great question. I'm glad you asked it. In an ideal world, once a week is perfect. You've got to have consistency. Now you get the outliers. James Smith's got a podcast and he might not do one for like 6 weeks and he'll do one and he gets millions of listeners. But that's an outlier, and that's because he's James Smith. He's got millions and millions of followers on other platforms. So you can drive people to that podcast when it goes live. But ordinarily, you want to stay consistent. So you want to launch your show either Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Don't do Fridays because the download numbers are 50% lower than they are ordinarily. And don't do them on the weekend because that's a non-starter. So Monday to Thursday, and the day that you launch your show, you want to stick to that day of the week every week thereafter. So again, it sounds daft, but it's just a consideration. Like if, for example, that Thursday you're a bit less busy, so you've got a bit more time, you can do the promo. That might be worth considering doing. But yeah, ideally once a week. We're finding a lot of shows now. I'm involved in a show, and we've taken it from doing good numbers to doing really, really good numbers by putting out 2 shows per week. Now, obviously, you sort of the basic intuition is, well, of course, you're doing twice as much, you're going to get twice as many results, but you also get compounding on that as well. You're not just getting double the amount of downloads because you're doing twice as much. You're now picking up an audience, and because we are doing more, the show hasn't really left the top 20 entrepreneurship shows in the last 8 weeks. We're picking up, I don't know, so like 10,000 download, 10,000 views per week on YouTube, and that's the main long feed, not on shorts and that kind of stuff, which we've not even really started to play around with as of yet. So yeah, once a week is a sweet spot. I get clients who do one or two things. They either go, I'm going to do it once a month. That's not enough. Or they come to me and go, I'm hyped for doing this podcast. I'm going to do it every day. I'm going to do a 7-day a week podcast. I'm like, oh, please do, God, don't do that. Because you train the audience with expectations of when you're going to get the content. When Bartlett goes live on a Monday, Thursday, now he does like a little bonus one on a Friday. That audience knows Monday, Thursday, Friday they're getting content. I guarantee, and I used to have this. I had a podcast when I first got started in 2017. If it wasn't live on the platforms for whatever reason by 6 a.m., I used to start getting text messages. I get DMs going, "Where's the podcast this week?" So you can train your audience. So yeah, consistency is absolutely key. Now, if the idea of doing a show on a weekly basis for perpetuity, i.e. until the end of time, is a bit overbearing, then what you can do is look at it like a season or a series. So you can say, right, I'm going to do 10 episodes. I'm going to take 6-8 weeks off. Then I'm going to do another 10 episodes. You can batch record it in advance. So then you're not every week just having to, got to record again this week, got to record again this week, got to record again this week. Like, make it fit what you want. Back in the day, series and seasons didn't really work in podcasting. It just wasn't a thing. but big shows like Happy Place started to do it. And also we are quite formulaic as creatures. You know, we're used to episodic content. We're used to a Netflix series being 6, 8, 10 episodes or whatever it may be. So a season's really good if you don't have to do it weekly, every week till the end of time. But even when you've got that season happening, when you launch, you go every week thereafter during that sort of 10-week season or whatever you're going to do.
Yeah. And I know you just mentioned there about like the different formats and kind of mixing it up, but in terms of kind of length, is it important to kind of keep to around the same? You just mentioned there, like the Steve Bartlett ones. If you go on now, there's some that are like 20 minutes, which are the shorts, obviously, that he's putting out towards the end of the week. But his main podcasts are kind of consistent in terms of length. How important is that?
It's a really tricky one to answer because a podcast should be as long as it's interesting, which sounds a little bit facetious, but I've done episodes that have been 2.5 hours long. And equally, I've done an interview with a brand new founder the day they launched their business. And after 28 minutes, the conversation didn't dry up. I knew that we'd come to the end of it because they could only talk to me about what has happened on day one, effectively. There wasn't any more to say.
Yeah.
So back in the day when I first started, there's a statistic of 53 minutes was the sweet spot. Most popular podcasts were 53 minutes. But that's because they'd averaged it all out. But I think that's because you've got shows like Joe Rogan that's doing 4 hours and getting 100 million downloads, and you've got a load of people who are doing 15, 20 minutes, so he drags the aggregate up to about 53 minutes. Again, as human beings, we are quite cyclical. We like what we used to. You know, we're used to a 30-minute TV show. We're used to radio programs that end on the half hour or on the hour. So 60, 30, 45, 60-ish minutes, you're probably there or thereabouts. It's difficult because there's been a push last year. There's a push towards shorter content. You know, I was seeing stuff that was around the 20 to 30 minute mark, working really well. But then equally, this new show that I've just got involved in co-hosting, the longer the shows, the more downloads we get, which is really strange because you normally get massive drop off, but we're just not getting that at the moment. So yeah, as long as it's interesting. But again, if you're only going to put out content once per week, I'd say you need to give that audience at least 20 minutes worth of content. You know, if you're doing multiple things per week, you know, I used to do a Monday motivation podcast. It was under a minute. It was intentionally like a short, sharp sort of jab in the arm, get going, maybe a minute to under 2 minutes, minute to 2 minutes in length. But then on the Wednesday, there was a full length podcast that went out. So yeah, so I've not really answered the question there. 20 minutes as a minimum if you're doing it once per week. But again, if you're having like a conversation or a peer-to-peer round table or whatever it may be, you know, can you really deliver that much value in 20 minutes? Probably not. I had the opportunity to interview Gary Vee a few years ago. This is when he was sort of like first blowing up and becoming Gary Vee. And they said, yeah, you can have Gary for 20 minutes. And I was like, what am I going to get out of him 20 minutes? And I actually turned it down. I said, look, I'm not going to get, the conversations that we have are long form. They're quite in depth. I want to jump all the, this was sort of like a Bartlett interview before Bartlett was being Bartlett. I was like, I'm not going to get anything out of him in 20 minutes. So I said, thanks, but no thanks in the end. So just bear that in mind. Again, it goes back to what we said earlier. What's in it for the listening audience? Can you communicate it in 20 minutes? If you can, cool. If not, it needs to be longer.
I guess as well, it's that old marketing rule of test things as well. So, you know, see what's working, test it. You know, if you are losing everyone, like you say, with your, I can't remember the name of your avatar now. Was it Gary? The commuter.
Good old Jim.
The commuter, you know, like you said, if you know that people are most likely to listen to you during that commute time, what is the average commute time of your customers? Then you can kind of think about that as well. You know, like, is it people listening in their cars? Are they listening at lunch? Like, how are they kind of utilizing your podcast? And
one thing I'd say to that point there, just to quickly touch on it, Katie, obviously you're probably really good at it because you're a marketeer, but lots of business operators aren't that good at it because you kind of set and forget. But test and measure. That's the key thing. Lots of people try different stuff, but they don't really measure it. In the back end of your RSS feed, there will be download numbers. You will be able to see facts and figures and statistics. You know, we produce, you know, 15, 20 shows a week. So we do monthly reports for our clients. So obviously we get a big sort of bunch of data that we get to look at and you can see the commonalities. But for example, you know, in your show title, if you're going to say like 25%, actually put the number 25% rather than typing it out, you'll get a 5% increase in the number of downloads that you get just by having that in the show note, in the episode title. And you notice little things like that. Again, I mean, if you are doing a podcast, which used to be just audio, but obviously now it's more of a production, so it might be the YouTube video, go back to the thumbnails. we'll quite often we'll make 2 or 3 thumbnails for a different episode. We put the thumbnail up, and if it doesn't pop, we'll test another thumbnail. Okay, did it get more download numbers? If not, right, we'll go back to the original one or whatever it may be. So test and measure.
And that leads on to my next question, actually, which was around like, okay, so we've decided what we're going to do. We know who we're speaking to. Physically, what tech stack should I be using? What if you were it was a out the box kit of like, this is the kind of tools that you're going to need in your back pocket. Where would I begin with that?
It kind of depends on what kind of show you're going to make. So, for example, if you're going to be doing it in person round table, then you're going to need a lot more tech than if you're doing it remotely. So you're going to need microphones, boom arms, mixing desks, and it might be that you haven't got the capacity to do that. You might not have the technical know-how to do that, which is fine, because there are so many podcast studios. Where whichever city or town you're watching this in, I bet, I'd bet my mortgage on the fact within a 25, 30-minute drive, there will be a podcast studio for under 100 quid an hour where you can go and record. I'm going to get a message now. Something's like,
I was just thinking that in the chat.
Yeah, if you are not half an hour, if you're someone really random, let us know in the chat. But that's a really good way of doing it. But equally, a lot of podcasts. So, for example, this conversation here, if I didn't waffle so much, this could make a good podcast episode. And to do this, you're kind of doing it. Like you've got it recorded via Teams, and you can use your laptop microphone as a bare minimum. Doesn't sound great though. But again, normal iPhone headphones that you get out of the box with your iPhone, then plugged into a laptop and a good webcam, sounds fantastic. But if I was going to do a remote podcast and I was serious, and this is another thing you've got to bear in mind, that this podcast is a representation of your brand. So if your website looks fantastic, your social media looks fantastic, if you've got your branding nailed down, the last thing you want is some ropey Zoom video that gets chucked up on YouTube and here's my podcast, because it actually devalues your brand rather than adds value to it. So as a bare minimum, I'll be using a platform called Riverside. If you're recording remotely, riverside.fm, which is a fantastic platform. It's like Zoom, but it's much higher quality. You record in 4K, it gives you good audio and good video. So I'd be using Riverside. I'd be getting a USB microphone. There's loads of them out there. You can get the best one, which is just under a couple of hundred quid, but it's called a Shure MV7. Which is a USB microphone, so it plugs straight into your laptop. And then potentially a webcam. You can get a Logitech webcam for like 150 quid, records in 4K. That and a little light, and you're good to go. So you could do really good quality remote setup for under 300 or 400 quid. And there's lots of other cheaper USB microphones. I just don't want to suggest them because all the podcast creators will be like, it's not a cardioid frequency. No. So yeah, but that's what I suggest that you do. But the other thing that I would say to people, whilst you want to look polished and professional, you are never going to be perfect. Start now and get perfect later. If I listen back to my first episodes, they were horrific. At the time I thought they were brilliant. I'd like a God Save the Queen drum and bass remix. I don't know what I was thinking. It's so weird. I basically shouted the intro. I was like, I had air horns like I was like on Capital Extra or something. It's so weird. But at the time, I was like, oh my God, that's the show that went to number 2 at the charts, by the way. So if you're going, that sounds rubbish. Wow. Sorry, it was a number 2 business show for a very short period of time, I might add. But yeah, start now and get perfect later.
Was that in lockdown when we were all drinking at midday?
No, this sadly, this was actually before it. I don't even have that as an excuse, unfortunately. But yeah, start now and get perfect later. Because I have had people who've literally got zero budget. They've done it on Zoom, which you can get for free. They use their headphones. Their iPhone headphones, because it sounds quite crisp and clear, and that will get you up and running. You don't have to spend a fortune. There's lots of podcast experts out there, and they're like, you need to have all of this soundproofing in this room and blah blah blah. You just don't.
Yeah.
You just don't.
Yeah. You could be like me, have a dog snoring in the background on your webinars.
There you go. Why not?
So just on that Riverside, I know the answer, but I want to kind of expand on it for everybody else. So scheduling, you mentioned scheduling earlier, because that is a big consideration. If you're at a point where you go, right, actually I'm going to make this series, I'm going to do 10 episodes, and I know that I want to guest on 5, so I'm going to do all of that recording up front and do everything, get it all ready. Does Riverside allow you to schedule through that? So you haven't got to, on a Thursday, set your alarm for midnight to get up and plug in your podcast?
I don't think it does, and if it does, it won't do it as well as other platforms. I'd be using something like Calendly.
Yeah.
Because that is something that just wastes so much. Or if you've got Go High Level, there's a built-in sort of calendar version for that in Go High Level. There's lots of apps that do that organisational piece. But what I see,
not organising the people, sorry, scheduling as in like putting the podcast out.
The podcast to go out.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. No, right, okay. Yes.
I wasn't asking for diary or organisation tips.
Yes, I've got a pen and a paper here, Katie. I don't know if you've heard about this. It's quite a high tech. So your RSS syndication software. So that's the thing that's actually going to push your podcast out. Yes, you can pre-plan and schedule all that in advance. So, for example, if you've done the 10 episodes, you could pre-plan all 10 episodes, and they will go out exactly on time. And there's loads of them out there. There's one called oh my God, my brain's gone like Libsyn, which stands for Liberated Syndication, because it's a syndication platform, libsyn.com. It looks old and fusty, but it's been around for years. It's really trustworthy. You've got Buzzsprout. You can actually use Spotify for podcasters for free if you want. And there's loads of platforms. But yeah, they will all have a scheduling software, so you don't have to get up in the middle of the night to press go on it.
It's always a worry. We think that we're like, people think sometimes that we've scheduled or we're there at midnight doing a social app for somebody, and you think no. Okay. And when we come on to think about like marketing, so we've made this amazing podcast, we've got Riverside. In terms of like editing tools, are there kind of good tools that people should be using to add to the tech stack part of that?
Yeah, again, it's going to depend on your level of knowledge and understanding, but realistically, I think even in Riverside now, I think you can actually produce your whole podcast there. So you can do the raw edit, you can import your theme music at the beginning or the theme music at the end. What you're hearing now at the moment, you're hearing a lot of, again, I'll use Bart as a good example, just because he's kind of leading the way in podcasting. You'll often have like some theme music and underpinning music and the guests over the top and the clips and all that kind of stuff. That's the top end of it. That you're going to need an editor to do, most likely, or an agency. But if you just want to be super basic, then yeah, I'm pretty sure that Riverside, there's a way that you can import your theme music at the beginning and the end, and you could do it in there. If you record and you don't like the sound of the audio, if the audio comes out sounding a bit rubbish, there's a platform called Auphonic, 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 and I'm sure it's like $15 for 15 hours or something like that of edit time. You upload your rubbish MP3 file, and it will do loads of compression and normalization, remove background noise, and it does it in a matter of seconds, and it's really, really good. Because someone said it to me, like, what do you think of this? I was like, this is gonna be rubbish. I put in an awful sounding track into it. I was like, deal with that Auphonic. And about 15 seconds later, I was like, bing, there you go. I was like, that's unbelievable. So again, if you're not au fait with this stuff, then that's a good option. The other thing though is, and not to talk myself out of a job here, obviously I run a production agency, but we are a East London agency with East London prices, and we're not for everybody. But there are so many freelancers out there on Fiverr, on Upwork, on People Per Hour, who will do this stuff for you for 10, 15 bucks an hour. So if you got the recording and you've got your theme music done, you could probably get your podcast produced for $100. It's going to be basic. It's going to be very, very basic what you've got for that money. But again, if it gets you up and running and gets you in the race, then why not? The other platform, again, if people have got a little bit of sort of tech knowledge and they're like, oh yeah, but I just haven't got the time, there's a brilliant thing called Autopod. So if you've got multiple camera angles, this thing called Autopod will cut the angles. So if I start talking, it cuts to me. If you start talking, it'll cut to you. And then if there's a bit of back and forth between us, it'll cut to like a wide angle. It does it automatically, and it will take an hour-long edit, and it will do it in a minute and 20 seconds. It's so cool. Obviously, our editors use that to save a big chunk of time. Then you have to manually go in and finesse when the camera angles change and stuff. But again, there's so much stuff out there now that will get you a good part of the way in advance. And then what a lot of people are missing out on is the marketing materials to make the podcast. Let's say you go to the effort of the time, effort, and energy of making this thing, but you don't tell anybody about it. That you will be surprised, or maybe wouldn't be, how many times I hear that from people. I charge £500-600 to do 2 hours consultancy with people. I'm like, okay, cool. So let's start. What marketing you do for your podcast? Oh, none. I'm like, well, this is going to be the easiest £600 I've ever earned. Right, let's start doing some marketing, shall we? But again, the whole clip thing is quite, if you're not in that space, can be quite difficult to do. Like, where do you start? There's a brilliant software called Opus Clip, and I'm sure that's about $20 a month. And with Opus Clip, you can put the whole of your video, your produced video, into Opus Clip, or you can even give it a YouTube link, and it will pull you out 15, 20 clips.
Wow.
Now, again, it takes a bit of time to get them right. They won't always pick the best bits, but it's a really, really clever little tool. So again, if you were recording it, self-recording it yourself, you use Riverside for free up until 4 hours per month, I think it is. You could then get an editor for, you know, less than $100 to cut it all together for you on video. You could chuck it into Opus Clip for $20 and get your clips out of it. So you could really be doing your own podcast for, you know, $150 a month, something like that. But again, that is the bottom end of the market. If you want someone who's going to hold you and actually run it through as a proper agency, obviously you're going to end up paying a lot more. But it's like any other form of marketing, you kind of get what you pay for. That would get you up and running.
Yeah, I like that. And I love how practical you are about this. I am conscious of time. We generally try and like get to the end of the question bit at about 1:45. But cool. I feel like I could keep going. So I'm going to keep going for like a couple of minutes because there was just a couple of other things. And you probably touched on it already. With some of the tools that you just mentioned there, I'm presuming some of them are like AI generated. But in terms of kind of like the future of podcasting, or just things that you're seeing happening in the industry now, what kind of trends do you see kind of seeing more of, or what can we expect moving forward?
I think it's going to be like any other sort of content marketing space with AI. People are slightly over-egging what it's going to do. You know, oh, then we're not going to need hosts soon because an AI will, you know, you'll be able to, an AI will tap into exactly what you want to hear. But I think people want to hear from other humans. Like I personally, I listened to Joe Rogan, an AI Joe Rogan version. It sounded like Joe Rogan. It talked like Joe Rogan, but I knew it wasn't Joe Rogan. So I didn't have that same buy into it. So AI is not going to replace you as a content maker, but it is going to accelerate the ability to make great content more easily. So I think it's a great AI tool. As I say, Opus Clip, that does use AI. You know, as well as putting the clips for you, it then gives you a title, a suggested title, then tells you why it's picked that clip, why it's got a good hook, if there's any trending subjects that it's talking about. So if you're really clever about it with Opus, you can then take that title and then you can go to something like ChatGPT and say, create me a clickbait LinkedIn post about a podcast clip titled XYZ. Make sure you include my name or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So I think AI tools are going to accelerate what you're doing. Yeah. You know, it's going to get to a point where you can go onto Riverside's got loads of beta stuff. Because some of our guys in the office are beta testers for Riverside, because obviously we're producing that much stuff all the time. So yeah, there are AI tools. They're trying to produce the clips for you. That content engine that your podcast can become, I think that part of it's going to get a lot easier. Yeah. I think as well, further down the line, I think there's bound to be ways that AI is going to find audiences, because that's one of the biggest challenges still for podcasts at the moment, is finding the audience. The great thing is, unlike radio, there's no Ofcom regulations. You know, there's no powers that be to tell you what you can and can't say. But the benefit of radio is that there is already, you know, if you're on Radio 2, there's 7 million people who listen to it every day. The podcast, you start from zero and you have to find an audience. There isn't a lot of, you can't pay to be on the top of Apple's podcast charts. You could, yeah, okay, you could fudge the numbers and get fake followers and all that stuff. I think that's a real surefire way of killing off your organic reach ultimately and getting the wrong kind of people, because it should be a load of clickbait farms. But I think, yeah, AI is just going to accelerate the tools that help you to make the content. And potentially, we started to use it now, like, right, okay, well, give me 10 episode ideas that would resonate with XYZ audience. So again, I think it's about utilizing AI to make you the best version of you rather than removing you from the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. Like, I've always, when I talk about it, it's about improving efficiencies of what you do. So you'll be able to kind of delve a little bit deeper or answer something a bit deeper for people. Yeah, definitely. And in terms of marketing, obviously, like anything, it'll be about testing what platforms. You should know where your customers are sitting, to be able to reach out to them. But one of the things that I remember from when we spoke last was around the importance of kind of the names of the podcast and how you list it on the platforms itself. if you could just give like 2 tips on like how to kind of, or what are the most important things when you're putting your podcast on and that are going to create standouts in that listings to attract new listeners, what would they be?
So I mentioned this earlier, but there's only a couple of ways to find a podcast if you go onto the app. It's either searching for a keyword or searching for a name. And then if you do, or if you went to like a browse category, you would look at the artwork. So there's only really a couple of places to capture people's attention. One is the name and one is the artwork. So I would go into the artwork category. I'd go into the content category that you want to be in. So let's say, for example, most people who are on this call are in the recruitment space. So there's actually a career subcategory in business. So there's 20 top line categories: arts and literature, business, science, comedy, and then there's subcategories within those. So you've got about 100 subcategories or top line categories on all these different platforms. Careers being one of them. So I'd go into the careers category, and then I'd look at all of those top 200 podcasts, and I'd look at the artwork and I go, right, what are the commonalities there? And then I've got a decision to make. Do I want to look like everyone else is in the space, which is not bad because I want to fit in with the peers in that marketplace, or do I want to stand out? There's a brilliant example a couple of years ago. There's a podcast artwork that came out. It's just everything else was very polished and very professional. It looked amazing. And this awful artwork came out. It was just a bright yellow post-it note. Do you remember like Comic Sans writing from like Word Art 96? It was that, but it stood out like a sore thumb. And so many people clicked out of curiosity. It ended up being a really big show. And it was a good show as well, which also helped. But yeah, so your artwork is one consideration, and then the name. And the name, as I mentioned earlier, it's got to be like Ron Seal. Does it do what it says on the tin? And if it can you include a keyword within them? So, for example, I wanted to rank for branding, so I call my podcast Building the Brand. You kind of know what you're going to get with building the brand. If you're interested in brand or branding, you're going to turn up. If you're not, you won't, which is fine. Then also one final tip, in the back end of all those RSS platforms, they will give you a place to put a description. Treat that like you would any other form of your SEO, your search engine optimization. So think of like, what keywords would you want to rank for? So within mine, I've talked about branding, marketing, PR, content marketing, content creators. I tried to cram as many words as I could without it being like black hat, but to help me to rank, because then if you type in motivation to the podcast apps, shows with the title motivation will come up, but also lots of shows that haven't got that in the title will come up. So where is that pulling it from? So SEO, the back end description of your show, like you would like a YouTube channel or your bios on LinkedIn, for example.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. So I'm going to pause us there, James, but I just want to give everyone a chance to add some questions to the Q&A if they have, or the chat box, while we just kind of touch on other bits, just dates for people's diaries. The next webinar that we're running is all about videos, so budget friendly kind of tips for videos and how to do that. We've got Neil from 432 videos coming on to talk about that, and I'll be doing a similar thing, picking his brains. I'm really enjoying these ones where I pick people's brains, really easy for me. And then we'll be looking at another one in April on culture and value-led candidate attraction. And then moving into April, we're also going to be looking at tagging your database for the future. Sounds really like exciting, doesn't it? But it's important. Okay, let's have a look at the Q&A and see if anyone's added anything. Just loading, sorry.
I can see him. Khan has asked for guest-based podcasts. Once you've utilised your network, what's the best way to generate more guest speakers? That's a great question. Again, I'd be looking at what is the outcome of the podcast? What does success in the podcast look like? One of the things that recruitment agencies are using this really, really well for is they're using it as a business development tool. They're getting their foot in the door. So that ideal client you'd be trying to get across the line, because recruitment's very linear, isn't it? It's very black and white. Hello, have you got a people need at the moment? Yes, we have. Brilliant. Can we pitch for the work? No, we haven't. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'll diarise it. I'll call you back in 6 months. It's very hard initially to build a relationship with somebody. So actually, when you're having that conversation, hey, XYZ, Mr. Ideal Client, hope you're doing well. I know we've spoken before about your people requirements. I'm actually contacting you about something different. We've got a podcast where we talk to industry leaders about XYZ. We've had on such and such, such and such, such and such. We syndicate this across Apple and Spotify and YouTube. And of course, we then distribute the marketing assets across our LinkedIn. We'd love to get your insights on XYZ. Now, all of a sudden, instead of you going cap in hand asking for something, you've now completely shifted the power dynamic. And we've had people who've then landed 6-figure deals with clients they've never been able to close before because they've been able to open the door. They've just got their foot in the door with people. So I think that's a really good reason for doing a recruitment-based podcast. But so, Khan, to answer your question, once I've gone through my existing network, I'll be looking, who else would my audience want to hear from? And the way I'd be approaching them is I'd be coming up with a list of ideal candidates, and then I would pitch them about the podcast. And I'd say, our audience would love to hear from you about this XYZ subject. Would you like to come on? It's literally that easy. I'll just do cold outreach to people. It depends on the marketplace you're going for, but I've got a really good little strategy where I do voice notes, and I think it works on LinkedIn really well because on maybe LinkedIn's less so, but definitely on like Insta, for example, if anyone sends me a video message, if I don't know them, I'm never opening it because you never know what you're going to be opening, if that makes sense. But I will always listen to the video. So and I landed Joe Wicks using this methodology. I landed Grant Cardone. I landed the guy who invented the trunky suitcase using the methodology. I sent them a voice note. Hey, I've got a podcast called Boom the Brand. It's an iTunes top 50 podcast in the UK. Obviously, don't say that if that's not true, but it was. We've got a great audience of entrepreneurs and business owners who listen to the content. Majority are in the UK or in the EU, as opposed to most of the big shows who are in America. I'd love to speak to you about what you're doing when you're coming into UK, for Grant Cardone, for example. I know you're coming here on tour in the UK. I'd love to speak to you about what you're doing, why you're now starting to look at the UK market. A lot of our demographic of listeners are probably fans of your content already. So it'd be great to just get your story out in a slightly different way. I appreciate you probably get 1,000,001 of these pitches. I'll send you some more details just so you can see that it's not some random guy in his bedroom. And hopefully, if you've got half an hour for a call, I'd love to make it happen. Send that as a voice note, bit self-deprecating, super personable. Then I send them a one-pager about the show, which is like, we've been featured on Business Insider, GB News, blah, 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 all that, almost like a credibility stack. And then I send a text going, here's all the info, just so you, please feel free to give me a shout out. Or if you are super busy, if there's somebody who deals with your diary, please let me know the best email address. So that's what I do. I do voice note, one-pager, text. So then they'll either listen to it, they will consume it, or they will read it. And that has got me in bigger rooms than I should be in on numerous occasions. So that's the way that I would do it, Calm.
Amazing, thank you. Helen has put great tips today, thank you. We've just launched our second season, 12 episodes in total today. Well done, Helen. And I'm really struggling with reporting. We use Buzzsprout to distribute to Apple and Spotify, and then add the video to YouTube and our company website. I feel like I'm tracking so many things across so many different sources. What key metrics would you suggest to track are essential?
So I would be looking at obviously the video views. I'm guessing you're probably embedding the video from YouTube onto the website as well. So that's probably, YouTube is probably your central source of truth there for how many views you're getting. And then on the back end of Buzzsprout has got a reporting functionality. So if you go to, because we've got a couple of clients that use it, there's the second tab at the top shows you the reporting. And what I do is at the end of the month, do the previous months. I do the first. So for now, I do like the 1st of Feb to the 29th of Feb and run that as a report. And then it should show you your most popular episodes. It will show you download numbers. It will show you devices you've been listened to on. It will show you where you've been consumed around the world. But yeah, if you need any help, anyone who's listening to this call, feel free to just add me directly on LinkedIn, James Burtt with 2 T's, BURTT. If you just Google how to find stats in Buzzsprout, it will show you. But it's fairly easy to do. But also, Helen, I wouldn't get too fixated on what could be considered vanity metrics. What is this podcast actually doing? The big thing is, what is this podcast trying to do for you? If it's trying to do lead gen, has it done that? Or have you been able to open the doors? If it's that you're trying to push people via links in the show notes of the description, is it doing that? Are you using things like tinyurl or bit.ly so you can actually track those link clicks and all that kind of stuff? Because if you're not, you're probably missing a trick there. But really, I'll be looking at your numbers on YouTube, which are probably, as I say, going across to the website as well. If you're embedding the video on the website as well, I probably wouldn't do that. I'd put an embed code from YouTube onto the website, so you're driving the traffic to one hub, if that makes sense. And then just on the back end of Buzzsprout, I'll be looking at listener numbers and YouTube numbers. That's probably, at least in that regard there, you can see, is it going in the right direction or not, if that makes sense, with those couple of stats.
Yeah, thank you. And then we will make this the last one from Lauren. But thanks for today's session. We've launched a recruitment podcast under our company and putting out an episode every month. However, it's a struggle to keep this up. I thought you were going to be like, oh, they're doing that with us. Struggling to keep this up as it's just me recording, planning, editing, distributing everything, as well as all my other responsibilities. Do you have any tips on how to get on top of things? This is probably the same question for every marketing person that works at a recruitment company where the company has decided to do a podcast. So, James, do you have any tips?
Yeah, top tip: come and use phonic.media. But realistically, I do feel sorry for marketing. So I'm a course director for the Chartered Institute of Marketing. So I do their podcast course for them, and I have every session that we do. I have bedraggled marketing assistants and marketing executives who come in and like, oh my God, I'm in charge of the mailing list, the socials, the website, and now they want to do a flipping podcast. Well, they think I could just magic it out of thin air. I think what you're going to have to do, Laura, is find ways to, recording, planning, editing, distributing. It's just too much for one person potentially. Yeah. As I say, if there isn't the budget to go and work with an agency like ours, have a look on Upwork, have a look on Fiverr or People Per Hour. What's the easiest way that you can? What's the easiest thing that's going to leverage the most of your time, for example? Because I think the distributing of it and make sure the marketing assets are good. As a marketeer, that should be your job. The recording of it, the planning of it. Can you use Calendly so people can almost like self-manage stuff? Is there a way that you can give the editing, the main edit, to somebody else? I would do that realistically. And then what I think is really useful for people is almost have like a content cadence. So for example, for every episode, we know we're going to make one trailer. This is what we do for our clients: one trailer, 2 short form clips that are sub 60 seconds that are done in portraits. So they can work for shorts, reels, TikTok, and they can work on YouTube as well. We then do an extended clip for LinkedIn, which is done in landscape. We then do the show notes, and we do a thumbnail for YouTube. And if they want us to, we can also then do a blog, and then we can syndicate that to Medium and LinkedIn newsletter and all that kind of stuff. But come up with the minimum viable thing that you're doing. So maybe it's one clip, podcast, one clip, video. Maybe that's the 3 things you need to be making, and work out which part of that process. Because I reckon for $15, $20, you can probably get the main edit of that done and dusted. You could probably get a little clip made for $5. So just try and get rid of some of that job yourself, because that's too much if you've got to do everything else as well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I'm actually gutted because I feel like I could go on, but I don't want to overstay. What did you say, James, earlier?
It's interesting.
Quit while it's interesting. So just thank you so much for coming on and doing this with me. I've really enjoyed it. I feel like most of the questions were things that I've always wanted to ask as well. So being my marketing hat on, I've really enjoyed it. So thank you so much. I will share, if you don't mind, I'll share a link to your LinkedIn on the email that I send out with the video, so people can connect with you. And yeah, thanks again. The recording as well will be live by Friday. Sorry, it's Friday tomorrow, isn't it? Yep, Friday. So it goes out on email then. And yeah, thank you again so much. And I look forward to seeing everyone at the next webinar. Podcast on the brain now.
There you go. I've got it. I've got her. I knew I would. I'll have her in the end. Brilliant. Thank you, Katie. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.